Welcome back, curious minds, and today we are setting sail into one of the most compelling and persistent mysteries of the modern age, a patch of ocean that has sent ripples through newspapers, sparked wild TV documentaries, and lodged itself into the public imagination for nearly a century. This is the Bermuda Triangle enigma, and over the next hour or so we will voyage through its history, examine its most famous cases, weigh the scientific and the speculative explanations, explore the cultural impact, and consider why this triangular stretch of sea continues to fascinate and frighten us, even in an era of satellites, transponders, and global positioning systems. Like and subscribe if you're intrigued by mysteries, and stay with me because we're going to look at the triangle from every angle possible. And we'll try to keep our feet planted both in rigorous evidence and in the human stories that make the mystery matter. First, to set sail, we need to picture the place. The Bermuda Triangle is loosely defined as the area of the Atlantic Ocean bounded by points in Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, though maps vary and the lines are more illusory than exact, existing largely in newspapers on documentary graphics, and in the minds of people who think of it as an area where strange disappearances accumulate. That lack of precise boundaries is part of the myth, and it also confers a sort of narrative convenience. If the sea is big enough and your outline generous enough, many shipwrecks and missing planes will fall inside the net. Still, the phrase Bermuda Triangle carries a weight that dates back to both real tragedies and the sensational stories that grew around them. So let's start at the beginning and travel through the early incidents that cemented this region in public consciousness, beginning with ships like the USS Cyclops, which disappeared without trace in 1918 carrying 309 men and a full load of manganese ore, and continuing to aviation mysteries like Flight 19 in 1945, in which 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, crews of 14, vanished on a training mission and a rescue plane sent after them also disappeared. These are not mere anecdotes. These are events with logs, with witnesses on shore, with families left behind, and with official reports that acknowledged loss without satisfactory explanation. As we recount them, note the recurring pattern. A vessel or aircraft is reported lost, radio silence ensues, searches find debris sometimes, and often nothing is recovered that explains the disappearance conclusively. The human element is central. Each of those losses came with people who lived full lives and who were suddenly erased from a narrative, and the gaps in information created the space where myths and theories could grow. And that is the second truth to grasp. The Bermuda Triangle is less a geological peculiarity than a cultural one. Consider the era in which the term gained momentum. The 20th century brought rapid expansion in mass media, and with it, an appetite for sensational stories. Reports of vanished vessels made for gripping headlines. A surprising factor in how the Triangle became famous is how writers, columnists, and television producers leaned into mystery because mystery sells well. Early book-length treatments in the 1960s and 1970s amplified anecdote into legend. Authors proposed everything from alien abductions to underwater cities with advanced technology. Those images captivated audiences and created a feedback loop. The more sensational the claim, the more attention it garnered, and the more it seemed worthwhile to search for other incidents to fit the pattern. So while the ocean certainly contains unusual and deadly phenomena, the cultural appetite for the uncanny helped shape the triangle into the myth it is today. Now, let us examine the most famous cases one by one, not to sensationalize but to appreciate the complexity and to try to separate documented fact from later embellishment. First, there is the USS Cyclops, the massive collier that set off from Barbados bound for Baltimore in March 1918 with a crew of 309 and never reached her destination. There were no distress calls, and no wreckage linked to the ship was ever definitively recovered. The Navy closed the case as the largest non-combat loss of life in American naval history, and the Cyclops remains a primary contributor to the Triangle's lore. Many explanations have been proposed for Cyclops, including overloading, structural failure, and severe weather, but without wreckage, each remains speculative. The disappearance devastated families and raised questions that were never satisfied. In the absence of evidence, the mind reaches for narrative. That is a basic human instinct. And it is one piece of the puzzle when we talk about the triangle's allure. Next, Flight 19 has a prominence that almost rivals the Cyclops in the story of the triangle. On December 5, 1945, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from a training base in Fort Lauderdale for a routine navigation exercise out over the Atlantic. They were experienced pilots and crew. And the mission was standard. Radio contact was soon disrupted by confusing navigation fixes and uncertain directions. The flight leader reported that his compass had shown erratic readings, and his position instruments suggested they were over land when they were over open water. The last radio transmissions expressed concern and then uncertainty. 10 hours after the planes departed, a Martin PBM Mariner rescue aircraft launched a search for them but crashed during the attempt, likely due to fuel exhaustion and rough seas, taking 13 more lives. Ultimately, neither Flight 19 nor the rescue plane was recovered in any meaningful sense. And thus Flight 19 became a dramatic symbol of the Triangle's supposed power to swallow not just any vessel but entire rescue efforts. But careful examination of the contemporaneous Navy reports suggests a different picture: inexperienced pilots, navigational errors, and perhaps inadequate fuel planning. Again, the lack of physical evidence allowed dramatic explanations to flourish. Flight 19 is as much a lesson in aviation risk and human error as it is a strand in an oceanic mystery. There are other ship cases that have fueled speculation over decades. Consider the Mary Celeste, often mistakenly placed in the Bermuda Triangle in popular imagination. The Mary Celeste was found adrift in the Atlantic in 1872 under mysterious circumstances, but its discovery occurred off the Azores, not in the Triangle. Its story nonetheless became intertwined with other maritime mysteries and fed the public's appetite for ghost ship narratives. Then there's the disappearance of the schooner Carroll A. Deering in 1921, found run aground off Cape Hatteras with its crew gone. There were signs of hurried abandonment, and the cause was never determined, though pirates, mutiny, or violent weather were all suggested. The point is less in cataloging each instance than noticing how these cases accumulate into a pattern of loss that, when viewed from shore and through the lens of sensational accounts, appears to suggest a concentrated area of danger. However, real statistical analysis reveals that the Triangle does not necessarily experience a greater rate of unexplained disappearances than comparable stretches of ocean. The Atlantic is an enormous, sometimes violent place, and ships and planes have always been lost at sea for many reasons. And now a consideration of natural explanations which are far from romance-laden but are powerful and plausible and which deserve careful examination. First, weather. The Atlantic, especially in the region around Bermuda, is susceptible to storms that can develop quickly and with ferocity. Hurricanes, tropical storms, squalls, and sudden microbursts present serious hazards to both ships and aircraft. A late spring thunderstorm or a rapidly intensifying squall can swamp a small vessel or buffet an aircraft beyond recovery. In the early to mid-20th century, forecasting and radar were less advanced, and pilots and captains sometimes encountered violent weather with little warning. Even larger ships can be overwhelmed if structural weaknesses, cargo shifts, or errors in seamanship occur during a storm. Rogue waves, exceptionally large and unpredictable waves that can appear even in otherwise moderate seas, have been documented and measured by modern instruments and likely account for sudden, catastrophic losses at sea. A rogue wave can strike the side of a vessel with the force of several tons per square meter and in severe cases break vessels in two. Such phenomena used to be dismissed as maritime tall tales, but scientific observation has confirmed their reality. The ocean is not a benign place, and this region lacks any sort of supernatural monopoly on its hazards. Another natural explanation to weigh carefully is the complexity of ocean currents and the presence of the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is a powerful, warm Atlantic current that moves north along the eastern seaboard and is known for its strong eddies and swift movement. Objects, debris, and oil slicks can be carried far from a site of a wreck, complicating search and making it difficult to find any sign of a stricken vessel. The Gulf Stream's dynamics also influence weather and sea conditions. And interacting currents can produce turbulence beneath the surface that would impact a ship's stability or a plane's ability to maintain control if it is forced into low-altitude flight over choppy seas. The ocean moves in ways that are sometimes counterintuitive to those on shore. Currents can alter search regions by hundreds of miles. And if a craft sinks quickly, the absence of debris or survivors becomes sadly more likely. Gas hydrates and methane seeps from the ocean floor have been suggested as a dramatic and rather cinematic explanation for sudden sinkings. The idea is that a large release of methane gas trapped in seabed sediments could reduce the density of water in the region, producing a massive bubble that would dramatically reduce buoyancy and cause a ship to founder. Laboratory experiments show that gas bubbles can reduce the buoyancy of water, and certain seabeds do indeed release methane in significant amounts, often triggered by tectonic events. However, definitive evidence of such an event causing a modern ship loss in the triangle is absent. While methane seeps are real and can affect buoyancy locally, the hypothesis remains speculative for most historic disappearances and lacks solid forensic backing, though it remains an intriguing possibility for scientists to study further. Magnetic anomalies and compasses provide another naturalistic avenue to explain some lost flights and voyages. Compasses are influenced by magnetic fields, and small deviations in Earth magnetism can confuse inexperienced navigators, especially in an era when reliance on magnetic compasses and dead reckoning was greater than today. Iron ore cargo, the ship's own magnetic field, and localized geological formations can all cause compass errors. Such misreadings could lead a captain or pilot to believe they were on course when in fact they were not. In the case of Flight 19, pilots reported compass unreliability, and while some have suggested a supernatural cause, the more mundane explanation of magnetic interference combined with navigation error seems more consistent with what is known. Modern navigation relies on multiple redundant systems: GPS, inertial navigation, radio beacons, so compass anomalies are less of a single point of failure today. But earlier in the century, they were a significant vulnerability. Human error, fatigue, and miscommunication are central factors in many maritime and aviation incidents, and the triangle is no exception. Crews can become disoriented, navigators can make calculation errors, and radio transmissions can be misinterpreted. Training levels vary, and the ocean imposes stresses that can erode judgment. Long watches, storms, and equipment failure all combine. The narratives of many disappearances include instances of poor weather judgment, overloaded cargoes, inexperienced pilots, or outdated equipment. When we peel back the layers of the mystery, human fallibility repeatedly shows itself as an essential ingredient. That truth is not satisfying for thrill-seeking audiences, but it is comforting in a way because it is knowable and often preventable with better systems and procedures. So far, we have looked at natural causes and human fallibility, but the Bermuda Triangle has also been fertile ground for more speculative and imaginative theories, and we should examine those because they are a large part of why the triangle holds such cultural power. Some writers have proposed alien abductions, arguing that unexplained disappearances are evidence of extraterrestrial interest in our seafaring technologies. Others have floated the idea of a lost ancient civilization, underwater Atlantis-like structures with advanced energy fields that interferes with compasses and radios. Scientific-sounding theories like a time warp or portal have captured the public imagination too, suggesting that vessels are not destroyed but transported into another time or dimension. These conjectures make for dramatic narratives and sensation but lack empirical support. No credible physical evidence points toward extraterrestrial intervention or time distortions in the region. The ocean floor has been surveyed extensively in many areas, and while there are interesting geological formations, nothing has been found that would support claims of portal-like structures. That does not make the ideas less interesting in fiction and in creative storytelling, but for factual explanation they remain in the realm of speculation. One important reason that these speculative theories resonated has to do with the era in which they flourished. The 1960s and 1970s were years of cultural flux and a deepening fascination with the paranormal. Books and documentaries seized on the Bermuda Triangle because it fit a cultural appetite for mysteries that challenged authority and for narratives that hinted at hidden knowledge. The triangle offered an elegant metaphor. An unknowable hole at the heart of the modern world. People wanted to believe in mysteries because mysteries are places where ordinary life gives way to wonder. That quest for wonder often bypasses the slow, incremental processes of scientific inquiry in favor of a more immediate, emotionally satisfying explanation. It is useful to remember that the human mind prefers stories with clear patterns, and when chance events cluster, particularly in a featureless environment like the ocean, the mind tends to seek causal links even where none exist. It's also essential to examine the statistical realities. Several researchers and organizations have looked at whether the Bermuda Triangle has a higher rate of disappearances compared with other heavily traveled ocean areas. When evaluated rigorously, the data do not show an anomalous spike in losses. Many of the incidents assigned to the triangle are common maritime losses, collisions, storms, running aground that have occurred for centuries in many places worldwide. The Gulf of Mexico, the North Atlantic shipping lanes near Europe, and the South China Sea all have comparable or higher incidences of accidents and unexplained disappearances relative to traffic. The difference is headline attention. The triangle has a brand that attracts coverage, and coverage amplifies the impression of an anomaly. In other words, the triangle may be less a true physical hazard cluster and more a phenomenon arising from selective attention and the media's appetite for compelling narratives. Nevertheless, that statistical analysis does not erase the human tragedies. When a ship like the USS Cyclops or a plane like Flight 19 disappears, the families and communities affected endure real grief and unanswered questions. That human cost is a solemn reminder that the sea is indifferent and that the risks of travel, exploration, and service persist. Families pressed for closure sometimes turn to any explanation that provides emotional relief. And that can mean embracing dramatic theories even when the factual support is thin. The tension between the human need for closure and the limitations of physical evidence is a recurring theme in the triangle story. That tension fuels the enduring fascination because it leaves room for both skepticism and speculation. Let's move next into the technological evolution of maritime and aviation safety and how it has affected both the perception of the Bermuda Triangle and the reality of risk in the region. The mid-20th century was a transitional era in navigation. Aircraft relied heavily on compasses, radio direction finding, and dead reckoning, and while radar existed, it was not universally used on every training flight. Ships depended on compasses, sextants, and rudimentary radio, with inertial navigation systems just beginning to appear. Since then, advances in GPS, real-time satellite tracking, emergency beacons, and improved rescue coordination have drastically reduced the chances that any modern, properly equipped vessel would vanish without a trace. Modern emergency position indicating radio beacons, EPIRBs, and automatic identification systems, AIS, transmit distress signals and location data to satellites. And law enforcement and rescue agencies respond faster and with better intelligence. This technological progress has, in effect, diminished the milieu in which the triangle's stories thrived. A disappearance today is more likely to be accompanied by a precise distress ping or a rapid, directed search than it was decades ago. That reduction in mystery is one reason that fewer modern cases get attributed to the triangle in the sensational way earlier incidents did. Another reality to consider is the role of human error in the context of advancing technology. Technology reduces some types of errors but introduces others: over-reliance on automation, complacency, and procedural gaps. Pilots and crews must still be trained to handle equipment failures. And when multiple systems fail simultaneously, rare but possible, traditional skills remain essential. Much of the triangle's lore grew during a time when equipment was simpler and therefore more vulnerable to individual error. Today, an aircraft unlikely to lose all navigational aids simultaneously without extraordinary cause. And ships have greater redundancy in their systems. So the modern picture is different, but the sea is still a place where an equipment failure, bad weather, and human miscalculation can combine to create tragedy. Now let's look at how the media and entertainment industries have shaped the story and kept the triangle alive in the public imagination. Documentaries, dramatic reenactments, And fictional works have all contributed. Television shows like Unsolved Mysteries and numerous cable specials turned the triangle into a staple of spooky programming. Filmmakers have used the triangle as an atmospheric device, a place where rationality fails and the rules of science bend. These presentations often prioritize suspense and emotional payoff over sober analysis. And in the process, they create a cultural cachet that feeds back into public belief. When a documentary dramatizes an incident without clear distinction between speculation and verified fact, audiences may come away convinced that the evidence supports a studied conclusion when in fact it does not. Responsible journalism and documentary filmmaking require clarity about what is known, what is conjecture, and where evidence is thin. Sadly, that clarity is sometimes sacrificed for ratings in the entertainment world. The triangle also functions as a cultural symbol in literature and art. Writers have used it to explore themes of loss, the unknown, and the limits of human knowledge. The metaphorical potency is strong. A triangle in the ocean evokes a boundary where ordinary life and the inexplicable meet. That symbolic power means the triangle can be used to express existential anxieties about technology and modern life. And this is why it remains a favorite subject for artists and thinkers. It says something about us that even in the age of global connectivity and precise instrumentation, stories of an enigmatic stretch of sea continue to resonate. The Bermuda Triangle thus occupies a fascinating space at the intersection of factual history, human psychology, and cultural myth-making. Let us now discuss some of the investigative efforts that tried to get to the bottom of specific cases, because the forensic processes used in maritime archaeology and aviation investigation are instructive and reveal both the limits and the power of careful inquiry. When a vessel sinks and the wreckage is found, investigators examine the hull, the cargo, the logbooks, and surviving equipment to reconstruct the sequence of events. Marine archaeologists use remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, sonar mapping, and diving expeditions to document wreck sites. These techniques have solved many mysteries by revealing structural failure, collision marks, or explosive damage. In many instances historically assigned to the Bermuda Triangle when wreckage was eventually located, the story turned out to involve well-understood causes such as fire, flooding, or structural compromise. When wreckage is not found, the investigation relies on last known transmissions, weather records, and vessel history to develop a probable cause. The absence of physical evidence makes certainty elusive, and that uncertainty invites speculation. When a credible wreck site is found and examined meticulously, the truth often leans toward the mundane: mechanical failure, severe weather, or human error. There are notable modern efforts to re-examine triangle cases with advanced technology. Deep-sea mapping and improved sonar surveys have cataloged large portions of the ocean floor, and where wrecks are found they sometimes reveal ordinary explanations. For example, historian and investigator research has shown that many vessels once thought to have vanished fell victim to storms or navigational mistakes. In a few dramatic cases, pieces of wreckage eventually wash ashore or are found by fishermen, providing tangible evidence to close a chapter. That closure brings relief to families and reduces the allure of supernatural explanations. The story here is one of progress. Better tools bring better answers, but we must not assume that all missing cases will ever be solved. The sea is vast, and some mysteries will remain because the physical traces have been scattered, decomposed, or buried under kilometers of sediment. That ongoing mystery is a fact, not a fiction. We should also consider the role of human narratives, how storytelling choices shape perception. When a case lacks evidence, storytellers often fill the void with cause-and-effect sequences that fit a particular genre: mystery, horror, thriller. The choice of language matters. Words like vanished without a trace or mysteriously disappeared carry a different weight than lost at sea with no recoverable wreckage. And subtle differences in phrasing can nudge an audience towards supernatural explanations. The triangle story is a reminder to remain vigilant about language and to distinguish between what is known and what is inferred. Good storytelling can be responsible storytelling, and we can enjoy dramatic narratives while still acknowledging the limits of our knowledge. Now let us broaden our lens and think about the psychological and sociological reasons behind why the Bermuda Triangle captures attention across generations. Humans are pattern-finding animals. We seek order in chaos and are inclined to create narratives that make sense of ambiguity. The triangle represents an ambiguous space, a map region where the natural noise of maritime incidents has been framed as a meaningful pattern. People are drawn to the drama of the unknown because it evokes deep existential questions. Do rules constrain the universe? Or are there gaps where odd phenomena happen? The triangle is provocative because it sits ambiguously between these poles. Some people prefer rational, probabilistic explanations. Others prefer a sense of wonder or fear that hints at something beyond ordinary knowledge. Both reactions are human and explain why the triangle persists as a topic in newsrooms and living rooms alike. Social contagion plays a role here too. Once an idea like the Bermuda Triangle becomes culturally prominent, it spreads. Parents tell their kids, documentaries air, and later generations inherit the narrative. Social media accelerates that process. Viral videos and sensational listicles can revive interest in old cases and sometimes misrepresent the known facts. Each revival contributes new layers of interpretation and embellishment. That process is normal for folklore. And the triangle has become a piece of modern maritime folklore that accumulates variations as it moves through time and media. It is a living legend, constantly reinterpreted to fit the anxieties and curiosities of each generation. Let's turn for a moment to the voices of experts, historians, meteorologists, maritime archaeologists, and aviation investigators because their perspectives ground the conversation. Many experts emphasize caution. They point to data showing that the triangle has no anomalous loss rate and underline the importance of looking at the historical context of each disappearance. Meteorologists remind us of the well-documented hazards of the region, including frequent tropical storms and chaotic weather patterns, while oceanographers point to current dynamics and the role of the Gulf Stream in moving debris. Maritime archaeologists and aviation accident investigators highlight the critical role of physical evidence and methodological rigor. Their message is consistent. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. When that evidence is missing, the most responsible stance is to hold judgment while working to gather more data. Experts have often criticized sensational accounts for prematurely leaping to improbable explanations. But they also acknowledge the cultural potency of the triangle and the legitimate desire to understand tragic losses. After reviewing the natural, technological, cultural, and psychological elements, it's time to discuss what the Bermuda Triangle tells us about how to handle mysteries in general. A healthy approach balances skepticism with curiosity. Skepticism keeps us from accepting wild claims without proof, while curiosity motivates us to investigate, to gather data, to probe hypotheses, and to remain open to new findings. The history of the triangle illustrates both the dangers of rushed speculation and the value of sustained inquiry. Good investigation does not make for sensational headlines, but it produces knowledge that can improve safety and provide closure. When we evaluate claims about mysterious phenomena, we need to ask, what is the evidence? Has it been independently verified? Are there plausible natural explanations that have been adequately tested? And is the claim being presented as hypothesis or as fact? These are guiding questions that apply beyond the triangle to any contested subject. As we approach the closing stretch of this voyage, let's imagine some hypothetical scenarios to make concrete how different explanations would play out in practice. Imagine a small cargo ship caught by a rogue wave. The crew struggles, floods occur rapidly, and within minutes the ship slips beneath the surface, taking critical structural components with it. The ship's emergency beacon might fail if power is lost quickly, leaving no distress call. The Gulf Stream carries away debris and survivors, and a search turns up little. That scenario is tragic but wholly consistent with known oceanic processes. Alternatively, imagine a squadron of training aircraft suffering navigational error due to compass anomalies caused by electronic interference on board, combined with pilot disorientation in cloudy weather. Fuel exhaustion and miscommunication follow, and the flight departs the planned route into open seas. A rescue plane is launched and becomes vulnerable to weather. Again, the result is a plausible, prosaic explanation grounded in known factors. Now imagine a more cinematic scenario: a sudden, localized release of methane causes the water to foam and lose buoyancy, sinking a ship and leaving little debris. The methane bubble theory has been proposed and is intriguing, but it requires evidence linking a specific seep to a specific event. Absent that evidence, it remains speculative. Each scenario demonstrates how multiple factors, weather, equipment, human judgment, and natural phenomena interact and can produce disaster without invoking the supernatural. We should also talk about the lessons learned and the pragmatic outcomes of studying incidents in the Triangle. For maritime safety, the tragedies pushed improvements in ship design, cargo loading procedures, and emergency equipment. For aviation, the incident stressed the need for better navigation training, redundant instruments, and clearer communication protocols. Search and rescue organizations improved coordination and adopted new technologies like satellite-based distress detection. In short, tragedies have often prompted reforms that make travel safer. That is a hopeful note. While the ocean can be cruel and mysterious, human systems adapt. Each lost ship or plane becomes, in a way, a teacher, contributing to knowledge that can prevent future loss. Finally, what about the enduring human fascination? Why does the Bermuda Triangle continue to captivate, even if many of its mysteries can be demystified by weather science, oceanography, and human factors? The answer, I think, is partly aesthetic and partly existential. Aesthetically, the idea of a triangular zone on a map that swallows the known world is a striking image. It invites the imagination and provides a canvas for stories. Existentially, the triangle reminds us of our vulnerability and the limits of knowledge. We are creatures who build elaborate instruments to measure the world. And yet vast oceans remain indifferent to our intentions. That tension between human mastery and the wildness of nature resonates deep in our cultural psyche. The triangle persists because it sits at that intersection. It is a reminder, sometimes alluring and sometimes chilling, that there are places where the sum of natural hazards, human error, and sheer chance produces events for which we may never have full answers. To close, I want to bring the story back to the human scale. This is not just a catalog of phenomena or a playground for speculative theory. It is a collection of human stories of loss, survival, and memory. Each missing ship and plane has left behind families, friends, and communities that sought answers and often received none. For those people, the mystery is not a subject for idle curiosity but a wound. Remembering that gives the discussion a gravity that is sometimes lost in sensational accounts. Investigation and storytelling can coexist. And they should. We can tell dramatic tales about the triangle while also emphasizing rigorous inquiry and compassion for those affected. That balanced approach honors both our thirst for wonder and our responsibility to truth. So, where does that leave us? The Bermuda Triangle enigma remains a fascinating cultural phenomenon. Many of its most dramatic cases have plausible natural or human explanations, and several investigative efforts have debunked sensational claims. Statistical analysis suggests the triangle is not anomalous in rate of disappearances when compared with other well-traveled regions. And many of the fanciful theories lack empirical support. Yet the triangle endures because it serves as a powerful symbol of the unknown and because humans are storytellers who prefer narrative coherence to ambiguity. The loss of vessels and aircraft in that region, like anywhere at sea, is a reminder of the ocean's power and the limits of human knowledge. As technology and investigative methods improve, we may solve more of the mysteries and the triangle's aura of doom may continue to fade. But even if every case were eventually explained by mundane factors, the cultural and psychological need to tell stories about the unknown would remain, and the Bermuda Triangle would likely persist as a modern myth, a place on the map where people project their fears and their wonder. If you've enjoyed this deep dive, please like and subscribe so we can keep exploring more fascinating curiosities together. Tell us in the comments which Bermuda Triangle case captures your imagination most. Is it Flight 19, the USS Cyclops, or some other story that we didn't have time to explore in depth? Do you lean toward scientific explanations or do you leave room for the unexplained? Let us know and we'll consider a follow-up video exploring listener theories and the most recent research in more detail. For now, keep your compass calibrated. Watch the skies, respect the sea, and never stop asking questions.